With us, Omar Al-Ghanem of Kuwait, and of a family with a heritage in Kuwait that goes back well into the 19th century. It is wonderful to speak to you.
Thank you for
There are
having
any
me.
number of topics that we can speak on in Davos, but I do think the future of the Middle East is something not discussed in Davos, and it's something that you and your family are committed to. I would go back to Albert Hourani in his great one volume on the history of the Arab people, and across all of that, they did not have the challenges of the youth in the Middle East. This is a new phenomenon, and you've had the courage to deal with this directly. From the Arab Spring of Tunisia, and with a distillate of all of that, what can the leadership of the Middle East do to engage the youth in the Middle East future?
You know, the challenge of youth that we have in the Middle East is quite acute, and given that we have one of the youngest populations in the world. 35% of the population in Europe is below the age of 30. 60% of the population in the Middle East is below 30. So we have 70 million people over the next 10 years that incremental jobs need to be created. So there's a real challenge that we have. And when you look at our educational system and the type of people, the type of workforce that we're creating from that, they're not creating critical thinkers. They're not creating people that can adapt to this fast-changing world that we have today. So we as a region aren't really competitive. So our education system is still around memorization, still around dulling a mind as opposed to creating a mind that challenges and is able to adapt to this fast-changing world. So when you look at the private sector, you look at entrepreneurship, when you look at new companies opening up, we lag behind much of the world. And so even though we have this tsunami of youth coming through, we don't have the ability for them to be able to enter the workforce because the governments can't continue to provide jobs for them, and the private sector can't take up all these different people. So there needs to be a third leg of entrepreneurship created. So one of the things that we've done is we helped to create an NGO called Injaz that we set up over 10 years ago across the region. It's in 14 different countries. We've skilled up over 4 million youth through this program. And what we do with that program is really teach them what it takes to be an entrepreneur, and what it takes to do to challenge the status quo, what it takes to have an idea and bring that to market.
Very quickly here, if I look at the royal families of the region coming from the tribes of ages ago, without question there's a generational change that you represent with your educational advantages, your work in investment banking, and we see it in Saudi Arabia, the new leadership of the royal family of the House of Saud. Is there a generational urgency to engage this youth, or is it business as usual?
You know, I think it's varied, and the Middle East is a big place. So as you look across the region, you have different countries addressing it with a different sense of urgency. So in Qatar, I think they're doing a lot on the primary sector education to really address and skill up their workforce to be able to adapt to this new world. In the UAE, they're doing more. In other areas, I think there could be more to be done. And when you look at the ministries of education and the type of, they have the wrong KPIs. So they're more about how many desks they have and how many teachers they have, and so I'm a big believer in you get what you measure. So if you're just measuring quantity and not quality, that's what you're going to get, and that's what our education systems are producing. And rather than producing people who are highly skilled, who are able to be competitive in this world, you're just getting people who can read and write. But when you look at how we rank in global math and science tests, even though we spend in the top 5% per capita, we're in the bottom 5%.
How do you switch that vector? How do you begin to move that?
Well, I think you need to get the different ministries of education looking at the right KPIs around quality, around how good the teachers are, some teacher proficiency exams, making sure that you have the right measurements. I mean, I have an interesting story for if you look at all the Gulf countries and all the wealth that's there, and where we rank globally in education, we're all in the bottom quartile. And there's the refugee camps, the Palestinian refugee camps in Lebanon. If you were to consider that a country and just those in Lebanon, they rank in the top quartile. And even though they have tents, they don't have the fancy buildings, they don't have all the schools, they have the quality teachers coming in and providing. And so it's really providing the right software, not the hardware.
In the time that we have left, I want you to address a stereotype which you with your family heritage can speak to, which is all in the Western world observe an angry Middle East youth that hits a certain age and stereotypes, whether it's the newly elected president of the United States, a broad group of Americans, certainly within Europe as well. These angry people come to those nations, and a select rare few can create real damage and harm to society. What is the responsibility of Middle East leaders to assist the West in this form of terror? What's the dialogue that can be established to lessen these tragic moments?
Well, you mentioned Tunisia earlier, and at the beginning of the Arab Spring, and that came out of despair. It was a young merchant who had 5 family members, a sister in university who was making $140 a month, and the police kept coming by and saying, "Where's your permit?" He didn't need a permit. He went to the local governor trying to get some justice, and he couldn't get it, so he lit himself on fire. And so when you don't have encompassing economies that allow young people to be able to take part in economies, it creates despair. And when you have despair, it makes fertile ground for radicalism and for come in and radicalize young people. So I think the answer to radicalism and to whether it's Qaeda or Daesh or whatever radical group there is to make sure you have encompassing economies where people feel like they have futures and parts in those economies. And that is the answer. I don't think there is another answer.